and we'll just be talking aloud. Hopefully there's a chance for you to ask questions. So if you do have questions that come up, do feel free to put them in the chat box, and I'll be able to address them all a little bit later. So getting back into the slides, just get back into this. Great. So the things that we're going to talk about tonight is about why nutrition is important in mental health and well-being. We're going to look at some common nutritional deficiencies and mental illness. There's quite a few common nutritional deficiencies that are found in people that are suffering from depression. So we're going to talk about that, and also in schizophrenia and in people with anxiety. We're going to look at the things that contribute to low nutrition, so it's not just about diet and what you're eating. And we're also going to talk about what to eat for optimum mental health and well-being. And also we're going to look at supplementation if you choose to go that way. This is just to show that there are loads of things, as you well know, that affect mental health and well-being. So there are psychological things, there are stress, coping, your own personal ability to cope with stress, life experiences, there's physical conditions as well. And what I'm doing tonight, as you can see, is a tiny little factor. Over the next 4 weeks, I am going to look at a few other things. I'm going to look at lifestyle measures as well. So we will be looking at things like sleep and movement. We'll talk a little bit about inflammation tonight, and we'll talk a little bit about inflammation next week when we look at lifestyle measures, and actually even the following week. So in week 3, we're looking about how to navigate the medical world. So we're looking at, you know, when you go and see your GP, what to talk to them about, what blood tests to ask for. And then the last session in 4 weeks is actually going to be a little bit about mindfulness, because mindfulness is actually being shown to be quite effective in supporting people with depression or anxiety when it comes to mental health and well-being. So just to let you know, there are loads of factors. We're looking at one of them this evening, and yeah, just keep your mind open to all these other things that contribute to health and well-being. And by the end of the session, I really hope that you will understand why your diet should look more like the one on the left here, the what looks like quite a yummy salad, and less like the one which we are shown with bad food or junk food, which is good old McDonald's in that case. And this is something else I really want you to be able to understand, that maybe, this is one of my favourite little cartoons, that maybe this is actually possible, that we can actually treat depression with a diet, or a good varied diet. So I'm going to talk you through some evidence about that as well as we go through some research around that. So what's a good diet and what's a bad diet? We all kind of know, but I just thought I'd put this out there. A bad diet is considered calorie-rich, nutrient-poor. So we think about processed foods that are very high fat, don't have any nutrients in them, and they're often really lacking in fibre. We also consider a bad diet to be pro-inflammatory. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit about inflammation a bit down. Good diet is going to be looking at nutrient-rich, diverse, so lots of different sorts of foods, lots of variety, full of fibre, and we would consider it an anti-inflammatory diet. So I'm going to actually look at some research about what impact might a poor diet have on our mental health. So I mean, I've been working in psychiatry for years and in the hospital for years, and very little, if ever, was diet mentioned as a confounding factor when it came to mental health and well-being. In fact, the diet served in the hospital and then sometimes the psychiatric units is pretty bad, and a lot of the clients have really, really poor diets, and this was really never addressed. I mean, they started to, you know, make sure that they couldn't buy Coca-Cola a lot more often, and things like that, but really there's very little emphasis on what what a difference a diet might make. So what I've got here is a little bit of research. So I'm just going to take you through a few studies which really look at the correlation between poor mental health and diet. So I'm really passionate about this because we know that in New Zealand there is an incredibly high incidence of mental illness. There's a very high incidence of suicide, especially in our younger population. And I know that we're doing amazing things here in New Zealand, but I still think in many ways we are a little bit of the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, and it's great to put in more services and more counselling, etc. But I really think that we should be looking at preventing it all in the first place. And out of all those factors I showed you before, I think all of these things could be addressed. And so I'm hoping for the people that are here tonight, either if you suffer from a mental illness yourself, whether you have depression or anxiety, or whether you have a friend or family member that has depression or anxiety, and I know that we've got some health professionals on board as well. I hope you get some really good takeaways from this. As I said, it took me years to actually get my head around the fact that diet could have such a huge impact. And for some of you, you may know a lot of this information and it's not going to be anything new. I think a few of you probably will learn a bit of new stuff, even the health professionals out there. And if you do know it all, that's fine. I think a lot of this is going to be really, hopefully will remind you of some of the things that we can do. So one of the first studies, this is actually a huge study. It looks at over 245,000 surveys of adults. It's California, so it's a US study. And so they're looking at whether a person has moderate psychological distress or severe psychological distress. And it revealed that poor mental health is consistently associated with poor diet quality, even after adjusting for a number of other personal characteristics such as gender, age, education, marital status, and income level. Now, I know that, of course, it might be that the depressed people have poorer food choices, but we'll talk about that a bit further down. So at the moment, we're just looking at the correlations between depression and poor diet. So this one here is another study that was done about the mental health in children and adolescents. And just read the highlighted bit if you like. I'm not going to read it all. Once again, found evidence of significant cross-sectional relationship between unhealthy dietary patterns and poor mental health in children. So I think that this is really, really interesting. We do have, like I said, our adolescent population, there's a lot of mental health problems within that. This definitely shows that this is true in children as well. I really like this study. It's very simple. It actually just looks at whether you eat 5 a day, the recommended 5 a day, which actually people say is pretty low compared to what we used to eat generations ago in the way of fruit and veggies. So this looks at the association between fruit and vegetable consumption and psychological distress, and basically consumers fulfilling a 5 a day recommendation had lower odds of being highly or moderately distressed than individuals consuming less fruit and vegetables.
Well,
so it's pretty simple, really. Daily intake of 5 servings of fruit and vegetables was associated with a lower psychological distress.
I'm just talking, but I think we're meant to be looking at the screen. She's talking to the screen.
Oh, actually, Pam, I can hear you. Have you not got a screen up?
Oh no, but I don't know how to get it. Sorry.
That's all right. No. It might be that the screen just hasn't come up. I'll go. Thank you. I can actually.
No, we got your picture.
You got my picture. Oh, well, that's good. That's fine. That's a good start. I'll just see if I can get the screen back up. Sorry, people. We'll get there. Just look at this. Is that better?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. You haven't missed too much. Don't worry. I'm going to have but these are just a few slides here about the studies that we're looking at. So we'll carry on. I hope to be able to actually send you out these slides so you can have a look at them. So this is, what is the difference between a bad diet and a good diet? So we've really discussed before what they look like. And I'm going to talk a little bit more now. I've talked about the basics. We understand now that a poor diet is associated with poorer health. We're now looking at pro-inflammatory conditions. So inflammation is really closely associated with depression, and inflammation can be caused by many different things. One of the things is actually diet. So diet can actually cause inflammation in the system. So inflammation will mean that you would have a higher inflammatory markers in your blood. It would be something that the GP might say, you know, why have you got some raised inflammation markers? And it can be from anything. It can be from illness or injury, but diet actually is associated, poor diet is associated with higher inflammation. So this is a rather interesting index. This is looking at dietary inflammatory index. So dietary inflammatory index is a tool that they've put together. It all looked rather complex when I tried to research it. Actually trying to assess what foods are considered as high inflammation causing. And so they've done a study here looking at, it's actually another quite a large study. So this is 3,648 participants, and looking at whether a high inflammatory diet actually related to depressive symptoms. So, and the high inflammatory diet we'll talk about a little bit, but basically it really is about processed foods, what we consider junk foods, and the conclusion is that pro-inflammatory diet is associated with high incidence of depressive symptoms, and this was older American study. And this is a study, another one. This is actually an Australian one, so we're getting a little bit closer to home. This is another study looking at 6,000 people, and once again, I think they used that same inflammation, yes they did, tool. And this one also suggested that women with the most anti-inflammatory diet, so the low inflammatory diet, had approximately 20% lower risk of developing depression compared with women with the most pro-inflammatory diet. So I hope you're starting to understand that diet has a real association with mental health and well-being. It's quite clear in the literature, and this is another lovely study. This is, they've done a meta-analysis, so they've looked at loads and loads of different studies, and they've got them all together, and they've said, what can we really get from all these different studies? And once again, a dietary pattern characterised by high intakes of fruit, vegetables, whole grains, fish, olive oil, low-fat dairy and antioxidants, and low intakes of animal foods was apparently associated with a decreased risk of depression. And a dietary pattern characterised by a high consumption of red or processed meat, refined grains, sweets, and high-fat dairy products, butter, potatoes, they go on to quite a lot of detail, is associated with an increased risk of depression. So, and they talk about it being a Western style diet. So you might have heard about the SAD diet, which is the standard American diet. They talk about it being a Western style diet. So a lot of processed foods, and red meat actually is another one that has both good and bad aspects to it. So this is looking at foods in general. These are the foods that we understand do cause some problems. So we talk about the pro-inflammatory foods, which we've just mentioned before. So alcohol in itself, small amounts, as we know, there's a lot of argument about it, and it all depends on the research that we read as to whether, you know, a glass of red wine is good for you or not. And a glass of red wine is probably fine. And it does have some antioxidants in it, but of course large amount of alcohol is not good for you, and it is what we would consider pro-inflammatory. The other thing about alcohol is that for a lot of people it really does disturb sleep, and I would talk about this next week, but sleep is a massive component when it comes to mental health and mental illness. So the other thing about alcohol is that I've found a lot of times in the clinic that people come in with mild anxiety, and getting them off alcohol. So they're the sort of people that will come home every night and drink a bottle of wine with their partner, and then they often don't sleep very well, and then they have this chronic sort of underlying anxiety. And often when they stop the habit of drinking the wine every night, their anxiety reduces. So alcohol is one thing that is unfortunately a bit of a double, a little bit maybe fine. Having it all the time is not a good idea. Added sugar, so we're talking about, you know, sugar and sweets and table sugar and things. We're not talking about natural sugars in food. Added sugar has got also a bit of an association with anxiety, often because what it can do is spike blood sugar levels. And so you get the spike in blood sugar levels, and then you get a drop after a while. And the drop often causes a stress-like reaction in the body, and often causes people to feel quite anxious. And if you've ever been quite low in blood sugar levels, you'll know the hangry feeling that you get when you are desperately wanting food. But you can get quite cranky, and some people get quite anxious with it as well. Refined carbohydrates are just generally pro-inflammatory, and also they tend to be converted into sugar in the body quite quickly. Trans fats and highly processed oils are also thought to be pro-inflammatory, and processed meats. So there's been a lot of research about processed meats, and they're associated with cancer. They're considered a pro-inflammatory food. Other foods that may affect you are foods that you may be intolerant to, and I've put gluten and dairy there because these are the ones that most people have issues with, whether you've got a lactose intolerance or you are unable to digest the casein, that's the protein in the milk, and for some people gluten can actually affect your mood if you do have an intolerance to these things. Prescription medication, I know that's not a food, but there are some prescription medications that also can affect mental health and well-being. Statins is one, and there's a bit of research around that. And some beta blockers, some heart or cardiac medications can also cause a little bit of depression or mood. Coffee, on the other end of the spectrum of the alcohol, this is another one that, you know, a little bit is fine. A lot is at times not very good, especially if you suffer from anxiety. So coffee is another one that for some people, you might all know people that can have one cup of coffee, but if they have two, they get really jittery and it just doesn't suit them well. So coffee is another thing that for some people actually increases anxiety. So it's got a bit of association between anxiety and caffeine intake. So that was a little bit mostly about pro-inflammatory diet and foods and how that can affect pro-inflammation associated with depression. So high inflammatory markers in your blood, it's got a high correlation with depression. This is looking at nutrient poor. So this is another sign of the bad diet is the nutrient poor. And what I'm going to look at now is association between people with mental illness and their vitamin deficiencies. So there's been quite a lot of research done on vitamin deficiencies in the psychiatric population. So if we look here at the ferritin or iron, so this is really common in New Zealand, very common in young women as well. There's actually quite a bit of research around that is a bit of a problem that 1 in 14 women over the age of 15 years old, this is a New Zealand study, has an iron deficiency. And people with psychological disorders have a reduced iron status, and serum iron levels are lower in schizophrenics and in controls. So this is obviously looking at really specific vitamins and their association with mental health. The B vitamins are, so they're a real collection of vitamins and really important when it comes to energy. Really important also when it comes to neurotransmitter production. And I'm going to talk about and explain the importance of that a bit further down. B12 is essential for iron production. it's really important if you're going to take a bee that you take it in synergy with other bees, because they work really well together. And so these specific vitamins have been found to be quite deficient in people experiencing depression as well. Zinc. Zinc's another one. So they've looked at people that are depressed, looked at their zinc status. Once again, appear to be low in zinc, associated with depression. Another thing about zinc is that it actually supports production of gastric acid, which I know sounds a little bit way off from what we're talking about tonight, but I'll talk about it a little bit later. It really helps with actually breaking down food, and when you break down food well, obviously you're able to get the nutrients out of it. Magnesium is associated with, lack of magnesium is associated with depression and anxiety as well. Magnesium is also really important for neurotransmitter function. Vitamin D is surprisingly actually also becoming quite common in New Zealand. So vitamin D deficiencies. Vitamin D is not normally tested by your GP unless you ask for it, and you have to pay for it as well, actually. But there was this one study that I found looking at people that were in the psychiatric unit and looking at their vitamin D levels, and over 90% of them admitted into the psychiatric unit had what they considered low or deficient vitamin D. So that is huge. That is a huge component, not normally tested. We in New Zealand generally think we've got loads of vitamin D. Vitamin D is associated with sunshine, so we get it from the sun. It is in some foods as well. But I think for a lot of us, we're not getting out in the sun very much, especially during the winter. And if we're working inside all day, that can be a real problem. So vitamin D is another one that's commonly deficient in people with mental illness. If we look down there, selenium is another nutrient that is really important for mental health. It's also important for thyroid function, and New Zealand soils are really deficient in selenium. And I've spoken to some farmers actually down south, and they actually add selenium to their feed because they know that the soils are very deficient in selenium. We don't generally take selenium supplements or anything else to support our intake of selenium as humans, but they do for the animals. Omega-3, so this is looking at fish oils really, and they have actually treated people with omega-3s who have got depression, and that can help their mood. And they're looking at EPA rather than DHA. That's just the type of fatty acid that's in the omega-3. It appears to have a really positive effect on mood. And the last one down the bottom here is iodine. Iodine's another one that's really essential for thyroid function. So we all remember about iodized salt, and it was to prevent goiter of the thyroid. And but a lot of us are moving away from iodized salt now. We're having Himalayan salt, or just avoiding salt a lot more than what we used to. And New Zealanders are increasingly showing mild deficiency intakes of iodine. Iodine's also important for some of the neurotransmitter function as well. So this was just a little summary from one of the articles I looked at. People with psychological disorders appear to have reduced iron status in schizophrenics and controls. Subjects with major depression have lower serum transferrin, so that's another iron carrying molecule. They also display lower zinc levels. Talks about the selenium again in the diet. So the lower selenium is associated with reports of anxiety and depression and tiredness, and improved by selenium supplementation. And the summary, these findings suggest a possibility that individuals with mood symptoms may have insufficient vitamins and minerals, and therefore may need more micronutrient supplementation than healthy subjects. So it's a lot of information to get to hopefully hold at least some of it in your head. And what I want to look at now is, okay, so we know that a bad diet is not good for us, and we know that a poor diet is associated with depression. What we don't know is, if you change your diet and improve it, is this actually going to make a difference to you. So if you have a really poor diet and you're suffering from something like depression, does it make a difference if you change it and improve your fruit and vegetable intake, for example? And God bless them, the people that did the study. This is actually a relatively new study, and it's based in Australia. And I think I first heard about it 2 years ago or so, and it's definitely one of my very favourite studies, and I'll talk you through it a little bit. It was actually a randomised study. So what they did is they separated, so they got about 64, I think, people who were suffering from depression. They've divided them into two groups. They gave half the group a modified Mediterranean diet. So really it was modified to sort of suit the average Australian, but did have loads of fruit, vegetables, olive oil, fish, and small amounts of red meat. So not too different than what we would expect an ordinary good diet to be. And they gave the other half, just as a control group, they just gave them some social support so that they had something to compare it to. And I've got the results a little bit clearer on the next page. And so the 64 people who were suffering from depression in total, divided into two groups, and they stayed on the Mediterranean diet for 12 weeks. And after 12 weeks, 32% of the participants in the intervention group, so 32% of those who had their diet changed with the Mediterranean diet, actually had a remission in their depression. And so this was done via some, I can't remember what tool they used, but a scale, a tool, an assessment. And they actually were no longer depressed. So this is really, really significant. And there are some antidepressants that don't even have as much success as that. So it's a fantastic study. It actually shows changing your diet can actually improve your mood. And as I've already shown, there are some other studies that have found a positive relationship between diet and mental health. In short, the better your diet, the better chance of good mental health. And conversely, we all know now that a diet high in processed foods is linked to poorer mental health. So if you are working in the health field, I'm sure you might be thinking about the people that you're working with. If you're a psychiatric nurse or something similar, you may be having some thoughts about the people that are in hospital. And if you yourself, you may have the perfect diet and there might be other things going on. Like I said, this is only one really small component of, mental wellness, but I think it's a very, very important component. And I think we've got lots of room to make some real improvements when it comes to diet and nutrition. So what does diet, what does food provide us? And food provides us with building blocks, so vitamins, minerals, and amino acids, and energy, obviously, calories and energy, for tissue, muscle, and bone growth and healing, as well as for hormone and neurotransmitter production. So food is not only fuel, but it is information for your cells. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by that. And that everything you eat can actually have an impact on your cells. I'm going to look specifically at neurotransmitter production now, and try not to get too concerned if you're feeling like we're going too deep, because I think if you understand this, perhaps will all make sense to you and understand how important food and nutrition is. So the neurotransmitters are chemical messages which send information between neurons by crossing the synapse. Don't get too worried about the technicalities of it, but neurotransmitters play a major role in shaping everyday life and function, including mood, motivation, and well-being. So you would have heard about antidepressants, and you may have heard something called an SSRI, and an SSRI is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which basically means what it does is that it stops the serotonin from being taken up. It keeps more serotonin in the synapses, and that basically, the thought is behind that is that it will help improve people's mood. Serotonin is known as the happy chemical, and it's often considered, like the antidepressant. There are other neurotransmitters as well. In fact, there's lots more than I'm mentioning here. These are just a few that we really know are about mood. And so dopamine's another one. Dopamine is really related to reward, motivation, and pleasure. And interestingly, dopamine is often associated with gambling. So the buzz that you get from winning something via gambling is associated with a release in dopamine. Noradrenaline is about the fight or flight response, and GABA is actually a really lovely neurotransmitter that's very calming and relaxing. So it's one that people with anxiety would probably want more of. So that's just a general understanding of neurotransmitters. They are an important part of mood and well-being, and I'm just going to take you through a slide or two about why and how nutrition might play a part in actually supporting the neurotransmitter production. So when we look at about how neurotransmitters are made, they're actually made from amino acids here in the middle. But amino acids come from our diet, and our diet, the amino acids are from proteins. So they're from eggs, meat, legumes, and grains. So you can get obviously proteins from legumes and grains as well, and seeds and nuts. Actually, there's a few other things you can get protein from. But protein gets broken down in your body into amino acids. So protein comes as a whole lot of amino acids joined together. You eat the protein, your digestive system, so the enzymes in your gut and the digestive enzymes that are released through the process of digestion, break down into amino acids. And these amino acids are some things like called tryptophan, phenylalanine, and glutamine. These amino acids will actually transfer eventually over to neurotransmitters, but they go through a few steps, which I'll show you in the next slide. But what they need is some vitamins and minerals. They need vitamin C, zinc, magnesium, iron, folate. There are actually more. And where do we get those from? We get those from our diet, and we get them from fruit, grains, and meat and vegetables. They need these what they call cofactors to actually convert into neurotransmitters. And there are some of the neurotransmitters and a couple more which I'll explain in a minute. So this is a slightly more detailed version of the other slide, but once again what I want you to just understand is that the amino acids here at the top, so you've got the tryptophan, for example, it gets changed through some cofactors through to 5-HTP. 5-HTP is, you may have heard of it, some people use it as an antidepressant all by itself. It's a supplement that you can buy. That gets transferred into serotonin. Serotonin is a precursor to melatonin. Now, melatonin is something that is really important for sleep, which kind of makes sense why depressed people who might be lacking in serotonin often don't sleep. But all these processes need these vitamins. So they need folate, which is from green leafy veggies. You need the vitamin B6. You need the zinc to actually help these chemical reactions occur. Magnesium actually helps the whole lot. So the magnesium is a really, really important mineral that helps these enzyme processes to happen. We've got phenylalanine up here. It needs iron. We've already heard how many people in New Zealand are deficient in iron. It needs vitamin D to change this from the phenylalanine into tyrosine, into the L-DOPA, and into the dopamine, which is really important for reward and motivation and getting up in the morning and wanting to do things. So this is the dopamine neurotransmitter. It needs all these cofactors, which you're going to get from, eating good food. When I first saw this, it sort of really made sense to me. Like all these years I've heard, you were supposed to be eating well, you're supposed to eat fruit and vegetables, and this is really important for your health and well-being, and really important, I sort of was, how does this on earth relate to mental health? It didn't make sense to me at all. But when I started to understand that all these wonderful amino acids from proteins need these things to actually break down and to make the neurotransmitters that actually are part of what keeps us happy and keeps us motivated and keeps us calm, so GABA is the calming one, it totally makes sense. And I really, really honed in and made me think, oh, you know, what are we doing when we are feeding ourselves a poor diet that is lacking in these things? Folate, for example, zinc. A lot of the foods that we're eating aren't fresh fruit and veggies. Are we eating them? Are we eating them in good quantities that actually helps us make these neurotransmitters? So we come down to what should we eat? What are we supposed to eat? And we know that there are hundreds of diets out there. Everything that you can think of, you can probably find in some sort of dietary, whether it's a grapefruit diet or a, I don't know, keto, paleo, Atkins, you name it, it's out there. High fat, low carb, etc., etc., etc. So, and it can be really confusing out there. I know that many people are totally overwhelmed about what they should or shouldn't be eating. So it's actually really simple. In almost all the studies, all the recommendations come down to a whole food, a plant-based diet, and it doesn't mean not having meat. It just means that most of your diet should be from plants, a large variety of foods, small amounts of meat, and regular fish and seafood. Because this is actually what's going to provide you with the nutrients that you need to actually make those neurotransmitters for a start, and you know, make sure that you're not deficient in important vitamins and nutrients for mental health and well-being. This picture on the left is it's a Canadian food guide, but I really like it. It's very simple. Our food pyramid that we had in New Zealand is totally gone. They don't even use that anymore. There is another weird heart-shaped thing, which I don't really like very much. But this is actually very simple. Half of the plate is fruit and veggies. There is protein foods in there, but it doesn't say, you know, whether it has to be where it's from necessarily. So there's all different proteins included in there. And then there's just talk about whole grains. So it's kind of simple. It's not too complicated to look at and actually understand, okay, this is what my diet primarily should look like. It's not to say that you shouldn't, you know, have other things as well, but this is the majority of the time. This is just talking about some of the protein needs, and this is based on the average male or female, and I think it might even be a non-active, sedentary person. So this is just, we don't really need to go through this, but these are some of the obviously sources of protein that you can use, and there is meat and fish obviously, and lentils and tofu and nuts and seeds, and there are many other things as well. These are just a few things. One would hope that if you're having a full whole diet, you're going to be eating things like nuts, chia seeds. There's all sorts of other things that can be added into that little list. But just protein is really important for the breakdown of into amino acids, which are the things that support the neurotransmitter production. These are all the foods that you can get some of these nutrients from. So we're looking at zinc. Actually, I think the food that's highest in zinc is oysters. So if you like oysters, you're doing well. Vitamin C, we know that good old citrus broccoli is wonderful actually for vitamin C. Iodine is from iodized salt and also seafood, but actually seaweed is actually a really good one for iodine as well. And you can go into the supermarket and buy those Ceres organic little seaweed packets that you can get, and they've actually, I think, I've got the full, I think one packet actually has a daily iodine requirement, I think. Selenium is from organ meats. Not many of us eat organ meats anymore. Seafood, walnuts and Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts are actually really high in selenium. Iron from red meat, poultry, eggs, and you do get some iron from green veggies. Magnesium spinach and broccoli, legumes, the B vitamins, a lot of those are from meat-based products. And interestingly, vitamin B12 you can't really get from, you can get it from added cereals and things, but really it's a vitamin that you can only get from meat. So I think the other thing is nutritional yeast. You can get a little bit of B12. Some of those aren't as well absorbed by the body. I've got iron in there twice. And vitamin D is from sunshine, and believe it or not, cholesterol. So having a little bit of cholesterol is supportive of vitamin D, eggs and fatty fish. So even if you've got a wonderful diet, there are a few things that might impact the ability to absorb the right amount of nutrients. And so just going to look at what are the other things that you can do to absorb, to ensure that you get a good nutrient intake. So the first thing that might contribute to a low vitamin or mineral status is, of course, diet, so insufficient consumption of protein, poor intake of vitamins and mineral-rich food, pro-inflammatory foods, and poor fibre intake. So I've been reading a lot actually lately about the vegetable fibre. It feeds the gut microbes in your body, and your gut microbes are actually a really important part of assimilating some vitamins and minerals. So vitamin B12, for example, is actually, it's the absorption of it is helped by good gut microbes. So feeding these gut microbes are actually really, really important, and the way you feed them is with fibre. Digestive problems, so if you've got a low stomach acid, so if you're a person that's getting a lot of indigestion, reflux, burping or nausea, especially if you have sort of fat foods or meat, it often can suggest that you've got low stomach acid or just not very good digestive function. And when you don't have a really good digestive function, those amino acids aren't going to be, the protein isn't going to be broken down into amino acids, and you're less likely to get all the nutrition you could possibly would otherwise. Stress affects your digestion a lot. When you are really stressed, your body takes all the energy away from digesting. It reduces your stomach acid production. It reduces your digestive acid production because it's all getting ready for fight or flight. And of course, most of us aren't fighting or running away from tigers or lions or whatever this function is supposed to be helping us do. It is, we're stuck in this chronic stress mode, and it could just be that you're sitting in traffic late for work, or you've had an argument with your boss or whatever it might be. So the stress that we're under nowadays is often psychological stress, and what it does do is it can really affect our ability to digest foods. And so what else was there? Dysbiosis, so imbalance of gut bacteria, once again, because gut bacteria can affect vitamin and mineral absorption. And moving on from that, medical conditions, so ulcerative colitis, celiac disease, two diseases that can really impact how you're able to absorb nutrients from your gut, and some people get almost malnutrition from having chronic diarrhea all the time. There are some autoimmune diseases such as pernicious anemia, which is inability to get B12. Heavy menstrual bleeding, so you're going to get low iron, which will affect your neurotransmitter production, and low iron will also contribute to feeling tired and sometimes miserable. There is some fear about increased intestinal permeability, aka gut. This is something that used to be poo-pooed a lot by the medical profession. It was something that alternative therapists often talked about, naturopaths and things, but actually there's a lot of research now to say that it is actually an issue, and increased intestinal permeability leads to inflammation in the body, and we now know that inflammation is associated with depression. Genetics, there are some people that will naturally be low have a low ability or capacity to absorb some nutrients, and sometimes vitamin B12 or vitamin D. So there's a few things that can affect your vitamin status. This is just signs and symptoms of nutrient deficiencies. So we're looking at iron deficiency, fatigue. You know that you're easily tired, you lose breath quickly, can lead to anemia. B vitamins, fatigue, heart palpitations, pale skin, altered sensation in your limbs. Zinc, white spots in your fingernails. Acne is sometimes associated with low zinc. Stretch marks, a loss of taste or smell, lowered immunity. Zinc's a really, really important part of the immune system. Vitamin C, bleeding gums, easily bruised. Immune system, we all know about vitamin C in the immune system. Thyroid dysfunction, so if your thyroid isn't getting the right nutrients, it can definitely impact your mood and well-being. Low thyroid is often associated with depressed mood. The signs and symptoms of a low thyroid are things like cold all the time, having dry skin, slowed metabolism, so constipation, and depression. And your thyroid relies on selenium and iodine, which I mentioned before. This is if you choose to supplement. Now, I think if you are suffering from mental health issues, I would always go diet first, but often it's too far gone, or you really just need the supplementation to try and build up levels reasonably quickly. And as we've heard before, if your digestion is suffering, you're not able to digest foods and absorb nutrients very well, sometimes you just need to go straight in with supplementation. It's the only way you're going to get the nutrients in a fast and quick way. In a couple of weeks, I will be talking about visiting your GP and talking to them about blood tests that you might want to get, and also looking at whether you've got any nutrient deficiencies. So that'll be something that you'll be able to get a little bit clearer on. But some of the basic things that the research has shown is vitamin B12 and folate. So they have done some studies about supporting people that are depressed with vitamin B12 and folate, and it is thought to improve depression for some people. The thing with supplements and with many things is that obviously if you give B12 and folate to a person that has loads, it's not going to make a difference. So for that person, their depression is probably caused by something else. So it's very hard to really pinpoint sometimes. If you get 100 depressed people, you put them all on vitamin B12 or folate, 10 of them might do really, really well. And that might be because they are B12 and folate deficient. It's sometimes a lot easier to start with a very good multivitamin that has all these supplements in it, and then increase or add extra as needed. So that's just something to keep in mind. Zinc supplementation has been shown in studies. I think they use that with an antidepressant drug, and it improves the depression more effectively than the drug alone. It's just about the type of zinc to use. Vitamin B6 and magnesium. This is B6 is, you can see that in that diagram a few times. B6 is really important in neurotransmitter production. The magnesium and vitamin B6 may be effective in combination with reducing premenstrual stress. So there's been some studies about that. So if you get really bad PMT, and it's also that B6 alone can reduce anxiety in some older. Essential fatty acids is about the fish oils. They have shown that they can be helpful in some stress actually, and they also looked at improving premenstrual syndrome in premenopausal women. So there's a few supplements that you can definitely look at, and I would highly recommend that it could be something that could be considered if you're suffering. Yeah. I'm going to look very briefly at gut health because I don't have all the time in the world, but just really interestingly, they've done loads of studies and looked at people's poop and looked at people with depression, and depressed poop is quite different than non-depressed poop. And we don't know what comes first. We don't know whether the depression actually causes the bacteria in the gut to change, or whether the change in the gut bacteria has then led to depression. So we don't really know that. What we do know is that there are some studies that suggest that some forms of probiotics do lower depression and anxiety scores. So there was a study done actually in Auckland, New Zealand, and it was with pregnant women, and they found that this particular probiotic, the Lactobacillus rhamnosus, actually reduced depression and anxiety scores. I've talked there about how bacteria, having the right bacteria, can help assimilation of some micronutrients. There's a really high correlation as well between irritable bowel syndrome and depression and anxiety. So there is strong associations that gut bacteria may actually have, well, it's definitely a correlation between mental illness. And there's loads more research that could be done, but you can definitely support your good gut microbes. The best way to do that is by feeding them vegetables. The fibre on the vegetables is what feeds the good microbes in the gut. The biggest disturber of good gut microbes, of course, are antibiotics, and this is a problem, and it'll continue to be a problem. Obviously, antibiotics are incredibly important, but they can also wipe out some really large amounts of our good bacteria. And I have found that some people do end up having gut problems after being on antibiotics for a sustained period of time. So it's just something to be aware of. This is just about trying to improve digestion in your gut, to have good absorption of the nutrients. We're doing good pH level, so that we need a really acidic gut. The stomach's actually incredibly acidic. It's like a pH of 2 or something. So you do need really good acid levels in the gut to initially break down those foods. You need good levels of digestive enzymes. You need a gallbladder, would be really, really helpful. If you haven't got your gallbladder, that can really affect how you're able to digest fats especially. You need a healthy gut microbiome. Appropriate transit time, that sounds a bit of an odd thing to do, but if you're talking about the time it takes for your poop, basically from your food to end up coming out the other end as poop. So a very, very fast transit time. So if you eat and then you end up going to the toilet within the next 4 hours or so, and you know that what you've eaten has just come out, that's a transit time that's not going to be allowing your nutrients to be absorbed. So that's really going to affect absorption. You want to have low gut inflammation, so you want a gut that's nice and calm and working really well, and liver and gallbladder function as well. A couple of tips there about what you can do to actually support your digestion. One is to chew your food really, really well. So your digestion and your breakdown of your foods actually starts in your mouth. So chewing your food, taking your time. You could have a little fun game of trying to chew your food to liquid. See how long that takes and compare it to how long you normally chew your food when you just chew it 3 times and swallow. So chewing your food really, really well is important. Slow down your eating. We often eat on the run. It doesn't give us the time for our digestive enzymes to actually do their job properly. Supporting the hydrochloric acid, which is the acid in your gut, and removing processed foods out of your diet. So 3 things that you can implement to support your better mental health, and this is obviously just in the way of nutrition. So pay attention to what you're eating, and you can have a think. It's a little bit OTT, but you might decide that you want to, is this enhancing my ability to make neurotransmitters? Am I eating the right sorts of food on a daily basis? Increase your intake of nutrient-dense food, so leafy green vegetables, of course. Protein is appropriate. A lot of people eat too much protein, so this is not an excuse to go out and eat a whole lot of steak or anything else like that, just to make sure that you are actually getting enough. But yeah, in many cases, in many populations, we actually eat too much protein, so that's just something else to be aware of. Chew your food well, slow down, rest, and digest. And this is just looking at a little timeline. So if you do suffer from mental health issues, anxiety, depression, or you know someone else does, this is the sort of steps that you can take to look into it. Number one, obviously, I always think diet is first. Whole food, plant-based diet, nutrient dense. Add as many vegetables wherever you can. Add in probiotic foods. So actually, I should have said pre and probiotic foods. So fiber is the prebiotic food. The probiotic foods are actually fermented foods. You can think about things like yogurt, for example. Kefir and kombucha are really popular now as a probiotic drink. Variety is really, really important when it comes to feeding those microbes and getting a really good microbe colony together. The more variety you have, the safer it's going to be. Reducing and removing sugar, food which contributes to inflammation, which is some of those foods I mentioned earlier, so refined carbohydrates. We're talking about heavily processed oils. Taking out some of those foods can make a real difference. Remove or reduce large amounts of caffeine. Alcohol would go in there as well. Ensure adequate digestion, resting and digesting, reducing your stress levels. This is incredibly important to support all-round health and well-being, but once again for nutrition as well. Chew your food well. Some people like to take digestive enzymes, which can support the breakdown of food. They feel much better on them. They feel like food is going down as it should and not repeating on them. They're not getting the burping or feeling nauseous after food. Some people use apple cider vinegar before meals because it's very acidic, and so it helps to support that hydrochloric acid in the gut. And last but definitely not least, sometimes I think this is the first place you need to go, adding a supplementation. So adding a good quality multivitamin, some fish oils. If you're going to get fish oils, please make sure they're very good quality and not full of mercury, which some of the cheaper fish oils are. Zinc is incredibly important. B vitamins, magnesium, iron, and I've mentioned digestive enzymes before. So the summary for tonight is that nutrition plays a very important role in mental health and well-being. Deficiencies in vitamins and minerals are common in mental disorders, so it's not something that we just think, oh well, need to, how important is it? We're all told we need to eat our fruit and veggies, but does it actually make any difference? It does. It definitely does make a difference, and what you can eat definitely does affect your mood. And that's it for tonight. So I'm going to see if I can get this to work so that I can get the video going, and if anybody has questions, you are welcome to ask. Oh, Sana, I'm unable to hear you. Oh, that might be a little bit late. Hopefully others have been able to hear me. So we'll see what has gone on there. So next week we're going to look at lifestyle measures that can support mental health and well-being. The following week, as I said, we're going to talk about what to do when you go and see your GP and how to navigate the medical world. And then the following week, we're going to look a little bit more about mindfulness. And I think Rebecca's been able to hear me. So just if you've got any questions, if you want to email me later, please do. I apologise for the beginning, it being a bit messy, and hopefully it'll all be a little bit more relaxed next time round, because it's all been quite new for me to do all this. I do hope that you've learned something from this. I hope that there's been something that you've been able to take away, and yeah, I look forward to catching up with you all again next week. I'll send you out another Zoom link, and yeah, any questions in the meantime, let me know, and I'll see you all in a week's time. And if anybody wants to speak, you probably can unmute yourself, but I think that